Okay. I'd like to call to order the April 21st Ordinance Committee meeting. We'll begin with a roll call.
Council Katerina.
Here.
Council Hamel.
Here. And I might mention that John Clucci will be joining us as the third member of the Ordinance Committee. So we'll press on with the agenda as published for this evening, but there are a couple things that we want to make sure we have a full complement as a committee, and we'll talk our way through that as we go through the various items. But first, I'd like to ask for a recommendation for approval of the minutes from the March 17th St. Patrick's Day Ordinance Committee meeting.
So moved.
And I'll second that.
Council Katerina.
Yes.
Council Hamel.
Yes.
Thank you.
It's really weird.
We should
There's
save a
two
lot of
people.
time just by having only two people to vote tonight. So we're going to handle a couple of items. We want to welcome back the folks from the manufactured housing community. We had a good discussion the last time they were here, and they've been off working diligently to make additional revisions. So we'll spend time walking through those as the first order of business, and then we'll talk a little bit also about the marijuana ordinance. So with that, I think we'll begin with the manufactured housing ordinance. We have that in front of us. It's been redlined. So I thought what might be helpful, and I'll look to Liam for his confirmation of this approach, but I thought we'd walk through it and maybe talk through the various changes. I think there was a general suggestion that we try to make the language more current and more accurate, and particularly as it related to substituting the language around manufactured housing instead of mobile homes, mobile home parks, that sort of thing. So let's go ahead and do that. And Mr. Foss, or yeah, and your counsel. Hi, welcome back. Would you want to walk us through the document, or would you prefer that we do it and you guide and direct us along the way?
Yeah, it's not really our document.
I was going to say.
The only change that was incorporated that we suggested was manufacturing. From mobile to manufactured, the rest of the talked to didn't get addressed.
Yeah. And I would suggest, I'm sorry, I would suggest, that this is coming out of the council, out of the town, that they will have a chance to comment during the comment section at the end. So.
Okay, is that how you'd like to handle that? Liam?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we actually have legal counsel available to walk us through the changes. The draft document that we have in our packet was put together by Phil Saucier. So he's actually queued up and on Zoom,
terrific.
so he can walk us through these changes.
Thanks a lot, Phil. Thanks for joining us. And
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
for the folks in the audience who've joined us, do you have copies of what Phil is going to go through? So, okay, thanks. Phil, over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yes, and I'll give a brief overview. I know Jay isn't here, and he normally would do this part, so I'll do that and then go through the document as well on what has changed since last time. So you may remember it's been a little while now, but we presented some recommended edits and updates to what is really a very outdated ordinance that the town has, called trailer camps and such like that. And the idea was really not to have any substantive changes, but really just to update it, clarify. Some of the language also isn't needed anymore, for example, and some of it's very outdated. So that was the idea, not to sort of substantially change anything per se. So we did a first round of that, and obviously there was some interesting part. Go ahead.
Phil, you're breaking up a little bit, so I might ask you to try to just repeat the last part of your statement there.
Sure. Let me see if can you hear me better now without I was talking through my headphones, but I'm wondering if
No.
is this it? Can you hear me better now?
No, it's
Okay. Yeah, you're breaking up too.
do you want to maybe shut the video, and that may give you a little more bandwidth? Try that before.
Yeah, you were actually breaking down too. I have bandwidth here, but let's see. Can you hear me better now? Is it not breaking up?
Yeah.
that sounds better, and that's a great photo of yourself.
Let's look at
so,
it.
Yeah.
You just look at a picture of mine from a couple years ago there. Yeah, so I'll very quickly repeat what I said. So just to sort of level set where we are, the idea was to update the ordinance, bring it in, eliminate any really redundancies and in provisions that aren't necessary anymore, but not make any substantive changes. So we presented, staff presented to you, and I was there a couple months ago now, at least. There were some interested parties, the DeFosses in particular, and Mr. Beagle, who had some comments and wanted to suggest some additional edits. So they did do so. And we received those, and Tom Hall and I met with Mr. Beagle and the DeFoss family, and went through their proposed changes. We then subsequently also met with staff, so the code officer, the planning director, to obtain their sort of feedback.
Okay.
And what we've come back with is another round. It is true, there's not a lot that has changed since the last time, and I can go through and have some responses to some of the proposed changes from the DeFoss family and why we did not agree at this point to put them in. Obviously, it's going to be the council's prerogative, but let me first say what has changed in the town's draft since last time. The most important change, sort of the biggest change, and one of the only changes, quite frankly, are that we did agree to change the terminology at the request of the DeFoss family. So instead of using the word mobile home park, that phrase has been replaced with manufactured housing community, which was a preferred term. And we saw no problem with that. The term mobile home park is a term that's defined under state law, but we just made clear, we just agreed to that though, and just used the same definition for mobile home park that the state uses to avoid any inconsistency. So that was sort of one of the most sort of substantive changes we made throughout. I'll go through each of the three documents just to make sure I didn't miss anything, but right now I'm looking at the licensing ordinance, chapter 1019, and you'll see that terminology has changed throughout.
Do you have the ability to share your screen? Do you want to go as you work through it? Or I can also share it and work through the changes.
If you can share it, that'd be great. I'm looking at a separate computer.
Do that.
Might help his bandwidth too with you doing that. Ted. No, thanks. Great.
Yep. So if you just scroll through that, you'll see that really the changes are to the terminology. I did notice one thing, and this is something that actually we sort of a compromise agree to, if you will, that did not make it in this draft, and we can do it afterwards, which is the Beagle, I'll call it for lack of a better term, the Beagle draft had requested that these licenses be issued simply from the town clerk and not the council. And we explained that that's not the way that the town does it. It typically is not done that way, that licenses are, at least in the initial licenses, are done by the town council, as you know, and the innkeepers and other types of licenses we have in town. But that we could potentially, this is a council decision, is potentially agree to renewals coming from the town clerk, but that could be referred to the town council if there's any reason, like there's any sort of update or any reason for them to do so. That's the typical way that Scarborough does it. I've seen other communities. So that's something for the council to decide. Right now, we've kept it all with the town council, but that's one option, is to have renewal go to the town clerk.
So from a process standpoint, if this is not too tedious, what's the preference? Would it be for us to revise these now and do a turn, or do that with the council?
If that's
I would
if that's
suggest
the only
that
change.
we
Go
go.
ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, Phil.
Go ahead, Phil.
It's actually, I was going to defer to Jean Marie, because it's really the council's prerogative. But if there are only a few changes that come out of this, you could direct us to make those changes and then pass it along. Is what I was going to suggest to the council.
Okay,
And that's what I was gonna.
great. So do you want to make a motion to include that revision as
So
we go?
moved.
So that okay, and I'll second that.
Okay, so I'll do that draft. So we'll.
We have to vote on that though, right? Phil, just give us a second to vote on that to make it.
Sure,
official for
yep.
you. Thank you.
Council Caterina?
Yes.
Council Hamel?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Phil. Back to you.
Great. That's one change that we had tagged for you to review. So that's good. And just double checking, yep, that's all the changes we made. While we're in this document, I thought I might just point out some of the requested changes and why they were not included.
Great.
So, and I'm gonna look through this other document, which you may not have from Mr. Beagle, but it was circulated before. So they asked for certain certain terminology referring to sort of the state license and the town license, and from the staff's perspective, because there is a state license that they have to receive too. They just thought that was kind of confusing, and the preference was to keep this is a town document, and there wasn't really need to refer to the state license. So we kept the terminology the same. They also had put in a license fee directly in the ordinance of $110. As you know, in Scarborough, we have a separate fee ordinance. And so we prefer to keep those out of the individual ordinances so that any kind of schedule of fees can be changed in that separate document. So we did not include the fee in this document.
Okay.
That I already talked to you about their preference to have the town clerk issue these licenses, and why, and the reasoning to not do that. But we're now going to let renewals be from the town clerk.
Okay.
There were certain changes that they had asked for in terms of the timeline of when they would expire. And for example, they wanted renewal applications to come before December 1st. And we had November 1st. And the reason, and that was a process issue, according to staff, there just would not simply be enough time to turn around. If the licenses are effective from January 1st to December 31st, there's just simply not enough time to process within 1 month. As you know, it's especially the initial license has to go before the council and just take some time. So we did not agree to that. They also wanted to delete the provision that says licenses are not transferable to new owners. And that's at the bottom of section 2. Liam, if you're scrolling around, you go a little further. So they would have eliminated that provision. We described in the meeting, and I still maintain that it is very typical that licenses as a general matter run with the individual of the company and do not run with the land, unlike a land use approval. So it is very typical for new licensees to have to get a new license if there's a change in ownership. I can't even think of one that is not like that at the state or local level. So we decided to keep that in, and you just would simply have to transfer it. You'd have to apply for a new license to transfer it.
Hey,
And then
Phil, so I
finally-
just want to, hey, Phil,
Yep.
just hold there for a second, if I may. I want to ask a question. So what you're saying is that's a matter of settled law? There's no, I mean, if we were to change that, we'd have trouble? I mean.
No, I think you actually could change it. I mean, I'm not going to suggest you weren't allowed to. I'm just saying it's typical that I'd say in most cases, I can't think of a type of license that you would not have to get a new license if the
Okay.
ownership. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Phil, can I ask?
Yeah.
a question, Mr. Chair? I'm sorry. Who pays these license fees?
The licensees. Yeah,
So each individual owner of the lot?
Yeah.
Well, not of the lot, because the
No,
cost
of
is
the-
on the lots.
we're now calling the community, the manufactured housing community. There's a license for the community itself.
So who's paying that fee?
The owner of the community.
Oh, okay, so the DeFosse
Yes.
family pays the licensing fees. Okay.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, thanks.
And then finally, if you scroll down, Liam, to section 5 penalty, they had proposed eliminating subsection B. And what subsection B under the penalty provision would do, it allows for obviously officers of the town, essentially the code officers, to notify if there's any violations and to be able to essentially revoke, for the town council to revoke a permit. I also thought that was a good idea to keep in there. Or we did, I should say, not just me, the staff, because the town council, I would argue, already has the authority to revoke, even without putting this in there, because they're the body that grants. But it's another enforcement mechanism. If there's some sort of harm that's happening, they could you could use this authority. So that was the other proposed deletion to this ordinance.
Okay.
I'm gonna, if
Go
you
ahead.
have any, yeah, do you want to do the zoning amendments now?
So I was just gonna, you kind of were thinking along the same lines here. I don't know that I don't have any further questions. I think, Phil, you've done a good job of explaining to us sort of point by point, the ones that were changed and the ones that were not, with the supporting rationale. So I don't have any further questions. Any other comments, maybe, Phil, sort of just summary comments? And then I thought we would give the other parties a chance to speak to.
Well, let's go through zone first.
Pardon?
There are two other, they'll be pretty quick, but there are two other amendments, if you will, that I could go through and then stop with my presentation.
Okay, go ahead, Phil.
So this next section is very straightforward. You may remember it. This is this special permit that's already in the ordinance that allows for someone who, if they have an existing manufactured home on a property in a zone that's not allowed, essentially a mobile home. They're sort of, remember we talked about there are two types of manufactured housing under state law, a mobile home and a modular home. So this is in mobile homes, which are not allowed in every district. So this is already exists. We didn't change anything from last time here. We didn't change anything. You can keep scrolling. So all we did here, and again, with the changes, I don't know if it's in color for you, but if you keep scrolling to the end, to the next page, this is all what you've seen. This is the state law definition. So we just put the state law definition in to update that and to modernize it. And then we made this change. So again, just to be consistent, we agreed with the terminology proposed by the Foss family. So we're going to call these manufactured housing community lots in our definition sections. So nothing, that's the only change to talk about. And then the final
Mr.
document.
Chair,
Go ahead.
I-
Let Phil finish his statement first. Go ahead.
Well,
Phil, finish your statement and then we'll let Jean Marie as a question.
No, that was it for that. And there's
Good.
one more section to review.
my question is, there are strikeouts in black and underlined. Are those strikeouts that were previously stricken?
Yeah. So what I
Okay.
did was the red is the change from the last time you saw this document.
Okay,
Yeah.
Great,
just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
thank you, thanks. So.
And then the final section here is the performance standards.
Okay.
These, again, you've seen this before. The essence of these came from the old trailer park ordinance. We pulled them in and made a new performance standard, which didn't exist in the zoning ordinance for manufactured housing communities, what we'll call that now. So we did make two changes that were in agreement with the proposal from the DeFoss family. And so in addition to changing the terminology, we did, if you'll see in subsection 4, the minimum lot area, they had proposed that it was at least 2,100 square feet. We had used the state law requirement, which says it can't be less than the smallest lots in town, which I think were 3,000 there's one district you have 3,000. So we realized that actually, so we agreed with them, because if you see subsection 1, we use a 30 by 70 and that equals 2,100. So that was actually, that's less than 3,000. So we just agreed and said the lots, so that was from their terminology, the 2,100 square feet. So we pulled that in. And then we also added this, shall comply with the provisions of chapter 1019. That's the licensing ordinance. And that's it. They had actually asked for some changes to this in terms of the setbacks.
Yep.
They had asked for 20 feet instead of 5 feet. And I'm just looking at their document here. We kept it to be consistent, essentially.
So my guess is there are also probably safety considerations between a 20-foot clearance. Or
Yes,
setback
so
and a
the
5-foot
biggest
one.
change was, if you look at that provision, which is subsection 3, it's talking about setbacks between manufactured homes. And in our language also, and this is again, it comes from the existing language, or any other building not on the same lot. So I wanted to point that out because the family had proposed taking out the or any other building. The idea being that there are some of these that have sheds or other structures that aren't homes that are very close to the setback to the sidelines. The staff felt strongly that they wanted to keep that terminology in. So that's something for the council to consider, but I wanted to point that out. They would agree to the setbacks between the homes themselves, but didn't want to have a setback from any other structure, which would essentially come down, could be a 0 setback.
Okay, I'd like to respond to that one if I may, and I'm ask Jean Marie to do the same thing, but if it's a difference between a structure or the home itself, if the paramount concern is safety, I think you got to go with the structures as you recommended
Yeah.
as the guide or as the limit for the setback.
I would
So,
agree.
yeah. Okay,
I think that is it.
okay.
Yeah, so that's where we
Great.
left it with the staff, and happy to answer any questions.
Terrific. Well, first of all, I'd like to say thanks a lot for all the extra work here. You've done a lot of revisions from the last meeting. So really thanks for moving this along. And I want to thank also the parties, Mr. Beagle and Ms. DeFoss and company for their participating. We'll give them a chance to kind of respond to what's been done and what may be left on their list at some point. But if there are any other questions from Jean Marie or Liam, you're happy with what we've done, and it seems like you've been very thorough.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. Thank you for everyone for meeting and, hearing out a few things. I mean, to me, this looks fine. I think that it needs to go forward to council like this. It's my understanding that there was some discussion about, whether there should or should not be licensing, but I certainly understand licensing as being important, just because it's a whole different setup when you get into manufactured home communities than as opposed to private homes, home associations and whatnot. So I agree with keeping licensing, but I would move this forward. That's my suggestion.
Okay, so I think at this point, what we'd like to do would be to, I'll take a motion to move forward the revisions as made. We'll also give the parties a chance to speak to this before we move on to the next agenda item. If there's anything further that, appears to be, very serious omission or whatever, there's still another chance for us to deal with it at a council level, but
May I suggest that because I know on our agenda, we have public comment
Yeah.
at the very
Yeah.
end, but if you wanted to have the party speak now,
Yeah.
I would think we should do that before we make a formal
So why don't we
motion to
do that?
move forward. to
So do I have a
council.
motion to change the order of public comment, and we'll give the parties a chance to speak to this?
So moved.
And I'll second that.
Council Katarina,
Yes.
Council Hamel.
Yes, and thanks for that procedural recommendation, Jean Marie. So at this point, Ms. DeFoss or Mr. Beagle, if you'd like to respond to what we've covered and, give us your feelings on, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Hopefully there isn't not too much bad and ugly. So,
as was commented, we did have an opportunity to have input for this. The input was generally not accepted in the proposals, and it is our fundamental feeling, and I met with the DeFoss family, and contrary to Commissioner or Member Katarina, we see absolutely no constructive purpose for the licensing ordinance. There's one provision in it which we think is constructive and it accomplishes the purpose that a positive purpose for the town of Scarborough. And in particular, in that regard, I turn to page 2, number 4A of the new proposal of the proposed statutes. And that's the one that says that, again, annually, the manufactured home community should provide the tax assessor with the location, and it says the occupants of the manufactured home community. We had requested and thinks it's only appropriate that and the reason for this is that the homes themselves are taxed by the town of Scarborough. And it's the owners of the manufactured homes, not the occupants, that are taxed by the town of Scarborough and by the state of Maine. And in particular, that term we believe should be owners of the home rather than the occupants. And it's of no interest or no valid interest who the occupants of a particular home are. So with respect to that particular change, we think that's the only aspect of the ordinance, and what the original proposal said that was presented to this committee led with the fact that the ordinance, the existing chapter 500, be revoked and deleted. And we think that is entirely appropriate, and that's not really contained in any of these current materials. But there was a lead in, I don't know if you have the materials before, that suggested that chapter 500, the trailer and camping ordinance, be revoked. And it should be. It's demeaning to residents of a manufactured home community, and it's also totally out of date, as I think Phil Saucier referenced. It just should be revoked. And that I didn't see that in any of this carried over the suggestions. And in place of that, there shouldn't be any ordinance. The ordinance that should be established is one that establishes that what is on page 4, number 2, prior to that the town, that the manufactured home community is required annually, and we would say on or before April 1st or by April 2nd, to kind of taking the language that's on, provide the tax assessor, furnish to the tax assessing department a plan of the park together with the names and location of the owners of the homes as of April 1st of the same year. And the applicant shall furnish the make, size, and year of the manufacturer of all manufactured homes in the community. That relates to the tax assessing responsibility that the tax assessor has. And that's a requirement that is a valid requirement. We think that should be this whole licensing concept, as I think I said before, and I don't recall how Phil responded to that exactly, but when we suggested that the only requirement, the only performance standard are the standards that are set forth by the state of Maine, and which incorporates the federal requirements for the homes that are and those are designed for the safety of the community and the safety of the residents of the community. And all of these other things that are in this licensing statute don't have any valid purpose. There's no real reason, except for this tax assessment one, to license a manufactured home community with due deference to member Katerina. There's no difference. If someone, I'm willing to take any discussion or why a manufactured home community is different than any other community in Scarborough that relates in terms of the performance standards that are required that aren't covered by this state of Maine. and they're inspected. Maine has a manufactured home community standard and licensing requirement for manufactured home communities. And there's absolutely no logical reason other than to try to demean or discriminate against manufactured homes and the residents for a licensing ordinance. There's no licensing purpose. And there's no enforcement ability. The state of Maine has the power to inspect communities. And for example, on this proposed ordinance, it says at the very beginning on page 2, after such investigations have been made by the town council, as the town council may deem advisable, the town council shall approve or disapprove the license application. The town council doesn't have any expertise or knowledge of what kind of investigation. I mean, there are no criteria. There's nothing there. This doesn't make logical sense, and there's no interest that's promoted by this proposed statute. And we will pursue that, and
Okay.
if we need to.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. At this point, so Phil, I'm going to kind of just go back to you on this question of, and I know we generally don't go back and forth from public comment, but I'm going to try to do that. I'm trying to get straight in my own mind and also a comfort level with, 2/3 of the committee together, whether or not we've got enough clarity and support for the revisions as recommended to put this forward to the council, or do we, does it make sense for us to address this matter that has been raised about the licensing? Phil, can you help us from a legal standpoint? My guess is that we can exceed state requirements, but can't fall short of what they require. Is that how it works, or help us?
Yeah, that's right. And we did have this, to Mr. Beagle's point, we did have this a colloquy, this conversation during our meeting with Tom Hall. And obviously it's the council's prerogative, but I'll say two things on the licensing. One is municipalities have broad discretion to license various activities in their community unless the legislature has prohibited such a thing. And that is not the case in this situation. Many municipalities have what they call mobile home park licenses that we're going to be calling manufactured housing community licenses. And the rationale, again, policy is really your side of the ledger, not mine, but the rationale that has been articulated for licensing for mobile home communities is that they are, as Councilor Caterina suggested, different in the sense that they're self-contained, unlike sort of an open street network, for example. And the town has some interest from a public health and safety to make sure that there are things, happening in a way that are, up to code and other considerations. So it's the way for the town to have some sort of, because at the end of the day, as you know, as counselors, if there really are problems, they're not just going to go. The owners aren't just going to go to the owners of the community. They're going to come to the town and ask the town to help with any problem. And so this is a way for the town to have some oversight. So that's the rationale behind these licenses. So that's what I'd say. That I will address one thing that Alan Beagle said, which I actually think we could probably do. One change he just suggested, which was under section 4A of the licensing community, which is the sort of notification that tax assessor, which I agree is an important thing because it make sure they already have to do that, but it sort of ensures that happens before a license is renewed. Is that he suggested we could change the term occupants to owners
Okay.
of the homes. And
Great.
I see no reason why we couldn't do that. And in fact, that occupant language probably comes from an older time when they're owned by the park owners.
Okay.
So it would be it was the next line down, together with the names and location of all homeowners is what I would change it to, manufactured
Great.
homeowners.
So can I ask for a motion then to make the change that has just been described?
Yeah, I just lost my, where is it, Phil? I'm sorry.
Liam's got it highlighted here, 4A. So.
Yeah, I can't see that far.
Right here.
Okay, so I'll read it to you. So this says, prior to license renewal, the town council shall confirm with the tax assessor. the
Gotcha.
applicant- Yeah, so, and so,
So it's
The-
four sub A, four
That's
sub A. Okay,
so the list will include the names and locations of all owners of manufactured homes, not occupants. And that
yeah,
was-
I would make a motion that we change that on this
Okay.
document to go to council.
And I'll second that. Thanks, Phil.
And then the final point I'll make, in terms of repeal of chapter
take-
500.
We gotta take a
We gotta
vote,
vote on
Phil.
that
Oh,
first.
sorry, I thought.
Don't lose your thought. Sorry.
Council Caterina.
Yes,
Council Hamel.
Yes.
Thank you.
Back to
Okay.
you, Phil. Thanks.
Final point, Alan mentioned that there's no reference to the repeal of chapter 500. That absolutely, so our initial,
Oh, yeah.
my initial memo to the board recommended repeal and replace with
Yes.
these provisions, and that would come in the form of the motion when you're adopting these. So yes, that's still very much the plan, I would think. If the council moves forward with these amendments, you would also repeal chapter 500.
do we need to do that now, or is that something the council would do at
Great
the council
question.
level?
Great question.
Phil,
It's a good question. I think if you move this forward, you could move to pass these amendments along and to repeal
and
chapter
to
5
repeal.
at the same
Okay.
time.
All right,
Why don't-
so,
Why don't I make a motion that we make that recommendation?
and I'll second that motion.
Council Caterina.
Yes,
Council Hamel.
Yes, and we'll want to make sure that won't be reflected in the document, but it will be reflected in the minutes. So we won't lose
Right.
track of that when it comes to the council. So,
I
Final
move, I
thoughts?
move that we move this to the council.
okay, and I second that?
Council Caterina.
Yes.
Council Hamel.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Mr. Foss, there was a question. I know we closed public comment, but did you have,
I was just going to give you this, rather than waste your time listening to me, I'll give you a document.
Okay.
You can pass it on.
and we understand there may be other things that you want to pursue. So we'll do what we can, and then we'll have to probably put some of this on a separate path.
When we met with, Bill in the town, was here in the town manager, none of our suggestions, even to the HUD code, the size of the home traveling down the road. That, that wasn't even considered. There were a lot of concrete changes that nobody bothered to consider. We weren't invited to the meeting with the staff. All we met with was Tom Howell and Phil. And that's it. And it's not fair to us. We've been in this town for 75 years.
So I'll tell you what, Mr. Foss, if you would hand those to me, we'll make sure those are included with the minutes. And then if we have to do something separately, or if there's there's another
plenty.
path that we have to follow in terms of other matters, we'll do that. But I think we're,
Well, there's a whole process too. Now it's goes to council and it's got to go through that whole process. So there's plenty of room for input and change.
but we'll make sure that these are included with the minutes and we won't lose track of these. Okay, but I don't know that we can commit to incorporating all of these changes that you're requesting, based upon what we've discussed so far.
We
So-
don't expect anything.
Pardon?
We don't expect you to.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Thanks.
Phil, any further comments?
No further comments. And Liam, I didn't know if you wanted to be there for this marijuana ordinances or just this one.
I think that we're having a preliminary discussion on some thoughts on the marijuana ordinance. So I think I can release you for the rest of your evening, and I'm sure we'll be back in touch with some additional feedback and guidance on those.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And if you have any other questions about this, what I'll do is I will follow up with the 2 edits we talked about here tonight, and send that back to staff.
Thanks, Phil. Very helpful. Thanks for all your work on this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm misbehaving with just the two of us.
So I think we'll then move to the second agenda item. We'll talk about marijuana for a minute, or cannabis is now we're gonna be. So I just want to take a minute to recap the last meeting, and there were some additional documents that were referred to in the last meeting. We didn't go through them in detail, but they included an April 4th, 2022 letter from Jill Polster of the law firm of Cohen Law, Maine, and also 2 letters from John Burke. I believe those 2 letters from Mr. Burke were part of the discussion in the last meeting on March 17th. So we ended our discussion, at that time, but in the interest of the parties, we thought we'd revisit and resume some level of discussion in order to confirm next steps and timing. That said, with the caveat that we want to make sure we have a full committee when we do that. The issues I just wanted to recap included 3 to 5 things: creating a new category for dispensary licenses, which would allow cultivation and manufacturing as permitted activities in the same fashion as the authorization for current adult use operations, removing unnecessary paperwork from the cannabis business licensing processes, reducing fees to reflect the town's costs, and then permit registered dispensaries. And finally, there were 2 other things: to remove and amend the confidentiality provision and to replace the term marijuana with the cannabis ordinance. I was going to mention, it's interesting to note that on the PBS NewsHour last evening, there was a segment on the evolution of this debate about marijuana and cannabis. I think there's still only 11 states in the country that where it is legal, so that there are a few other states to get through. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a note in the minutes with a link to YouTube, and also the point in that particular segment called the Green Rush, for people to kind of get some background information. I found it very helpful. So I'd encourage folks to, as you're reading through the minutes and your other reading on a nightstand in the evening there, take a look at this. So, but I commit to you that we'll follow the same approach to these things that are pending for us as we did with the marijuana ordinances in general, where we, over 12 to 18 months went through them pretty thoroughly, and also gave, the various parties an opportunity to speak to this. So we'll take that same approach on these handful of issues. So I don't know how much more, Jean Marie, I know isn't, probably an authority on this.
I wouldn't call me an authority.
Well, pretty close to it. And I recall that, Larissa Crockett was
A lot of work.
very helpful, in that process. I know Liam participated in it as well. So, Jean Marie, if you'd like to have.
Yeah, I mean, I agree totally with you, Mr. Chair. I think, the points you brought up that we want to be looking at, those 5 points, it's not going to happen overnight. I think we do need to work them through carefully. I would like to see the full house, so to speak, of the ordinance committee here, because Mr. Pucci's away. He's on family vacation. So I would respectfully suggest that we table all of this until a future time. I don't know if it's be the next meeting or what you want to do. I'm still feeling like it's a little, and I'm using my hand motions here, it's a little disorganized, and
There's a lot.
there's a lot of
and it's-
moving pieces to it that needs to be further
Right.
defined. I mean, what are we looking at? I mean, what are the proposals? I
Right.
mean, so they're saying unnecessary paperwork. Okay, well, what needs to be eliminated? What doesn't? The fees.
Right.
Frankly, I think the fees are still pretty much in line with what I've seen other communities and municipalities of our size.
Right.
I mean, but we need to make sure of all of that. There's a lot of research and background that still needs to be done. So I would suggest that we get some of that done, or at least for a few of the points before
Right.
we meet again with this.
Right. There's another stream as well, in addition to the ones that you've articulated. And we participated this in as well in long range planning, where there's some pressure from similar groups
Right.
to include cultivation
Yeah.
in the RF zone. So as
Right.
people well know, there are other factors we've been dealing with in terms of odor and the like. So it's not, I mean, I hate to say something is a complicated issue, but this is a multifaceted, pretty complex, pretty controversial issue. We want to be sure we're methodical and fair as we move through
Plus,
it.
the federal government is still working through a few things. I saw something yesterday, how the feds are looking at they want to be reclassifying,
Yep.
cannabis or marijuana, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
And so there are a lot of moving parts to it. So I want to make sure we get it as
Great.
right as we can
Good.
with what we're dealing with. And Liam, are you waiting to say something?
Yes, we haven't forgotten.
That's
If-
it for me.
Mr. Chairman, if I could. So just to give some background, just build off of the issue on the agenda was really brought forward by former Councillor Johnson, who I think sought to seek support for looking at the fee for medical manufacturing in line and possibly looking at a fee parallel to medical cultivation. Again, these are caregivers. And so whether there's some interest from the committee in looking at that specific fee, I think he also had some interest. And again, some of this were comments he made in public, others conversations between him and I about looking at some of the superfluous documents that we require now to try to streamline the application and renewal process. I think that John Burke, who his letters are were updated in the packet today, outlines some of the documents or requirements he feels are not necessary. Some of those I personally agree with, some perhaps not. I think that Chair Hamel did I have the same list on my pad about issues or items that I think we should look at in the current ordinance as it stands now. I guess I think the one thing that I have on my list that wasn't referenced. So again, we're talking about whether the characterization or the term marijuana in place of cannabis. I understand there's some interest there, and my sense is that was deliberate to use the term marijuana, and I was not part of those discussions when the ordinance was formed. So I guess I would want to better understand the rationale there.
Yep.
The fees. I think in addition to the medical manufacturing fee, I think that there's some question if the committee and subsequently the council wants to consider licensing the new iteration of dispensary, which means something different now than it did when the ordinance was originally crafted. I think there's probably an opportunity to look at a fee in line with that. The pieces again that John Burke referenced, a passport photo, the corporate documents, an operations plan, looking at our confidentiality provisions. I think that there's really some genuine interest in looking at those components. I think the one thing I would add is we have some thoughts from staff on the security plan. There's some requirements in there that simply are not always feasible. I think that our police contact, Sergeant Flynn, is prepared to bring forward some written comments and suggestions in that regard. So all of that, I guess, is my question is, I know that last time there was some suggestion about what the next step should be. I think that the chair requested some written comments from advocates in the industry, which I think have been brought forward this evening. I guess from a process standpoint, is there value to, I think I've heard from Councillor Katarina in the past that she likes to respond to some specifics. And so is there interest in having staff bring forward tangible, I'm not talking about necessarily red line language, but tangible suggestions for amendments to the ordinance and then have a discussion based on those changes for the next meeting?
Yeah, I think I'm okay with that. And I'll ask for Councillor Katarina's comments as well. In general, though, let's say is I think we gave some initial opinions on, areas we thought there could be some improvements, and you touched on a couple of these. One is revisiting the process to see if there are ways for us to streamline that, and also a chance for us to look at fees. I think we indicated that we thought the fees were okay. What I'd be interested in is, someone asked me the other day, has the town made any money on, in the marijuana business in Scarborough? And I'm like, I don't think we're breaking even on the fees in terms of the staff time that we're it's being devoted to this. So you would be much closer to that than me.
I think that our current process does require renewal inspections. I need to go back and look at our running list of fees. I know through the first sort of turn, if you will, I think that our revenue was somewhere in the $80,000 to $85,000 range between application fees and license fees. I would expect, I don't know if we could, I don't know. I don't think that we're certainly, this is not a boon to the coffers by any means. But I wouldn't say that we're definitely losing money either.
Yeah.
I think that we're still trying to work out some of the implementation changes and some of the learning curve with that.
So what I'd say is I think I'd be interested in seeing some suggestions in terms of where we can make some improvements with efficiencies, but I'm not, in terms of the broader questions about big changes to dispensaries and then sort of expanding that to adult use, I think is that's an area we want to move very carefully on, particularly as it relates to retail activity or the, the equivalent to that. There are also other questions. And again, I don't want to complicate it, but when we were talking about cultivation in the RF zones, in addition to the matters of security that you mentioned, which are not insignificant,
Right.
there are also questions of lighting, and barbed wire fences and, security gates and so forth, alarms. And, those are things that you don't typically think of next to a chicken barn, or, more traditional forms of, of RF cultivation. So I just say, let's, dip our toe into it, but don't get too far ahead of ourselves, because I'd rather defer to the full committee and then ultimately, firm up our thinking with the council.
Yeah, and again, Liam knows where I'm at it with it is, some draft language. And maybe if you or other staff could look at what's going on with the state right now, because I know Chris Chiazzo, Representative Chiazzo's on, he's the House Chair of that committee that deals with marijuana and whatnot. I know they had a lot of bills and whatever, and I know we have this copy of this bill from Rachel Talbot Ross on, changing the term marijuana. And I'd like to know, where did all that end up? And how is that going, to affect, and what might be coming down the road if we could, so that we're not doing something and then the state saying, whoa, wait a minute, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Because I do know that some of the paperwork requirements, the reasons they went into the ordinance originally was because that was required by the state at the time originally. So how has that changed? That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, and I think that just building on Councilor Katarina's comments, so we're one of 11 states in the country that have legalized marijuana, cannabis, and I don't. When we were reviewing these for adoption as a town, one of the options was not opting into any of it.
Right.
So we were very cautious and slow and steady. So I don't want to position us on the cutting edge here. I'd much rather have us be, moving forward in a similar fashion as we did in the first place.
And if you may recall, part of why we took a more cautious approach was we were reflecting what the will of the people were when the state vote came along. Scarborough was one of the few towns in the immediate area who voted against legalizing marijuana. So.
Now, 3 or 4 years later, it might be a different story, but we want to make sure we're allowing time for that. So, Liam.
Yeah, just a few just comments, I guess. So I think that the requirements, and I appreciate that, Councilor Katarina, because that's helpful to know that some of those requirements that we had in our local licensing ordinance were really just a continuation and duplication of the state requirements, whether they're obtaining a caregiver license or a conditional license for some adult use capacity. I think that the comment from, I think, Attorney Burke in the past has been, the state sort of already covered that base, so if they have a caregiver license or they have a conditional license, they sort of done the work for you. So why at the local level do you need to verify by looking at the same document? So I don't make that as a point in the direction of let's remove it.
Right.
But I think that is something that should be part of the conversation about what
Right.
we require locally.
And that's what I want to
yeah.
find out or remind us of.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that with regard to, I know that I think that there's some marijuana fatigue from the council standpoint. And I think even from the ordinance committee standpoint, where it was such a labor intensive process to get the initial ordinance on board. I think the reality is, though, what you just suggested, Councilor Katarina, that this is an environment that is in perpetual change, it seems like. And so what I also might recommend is that we ask for, again, Phil, I think probably just needs to have a standing appointment on ordinance committee for the foreseeable future, but perhaps does a cursory review of the ordinance and makes any other suggested changes, that things that might be out of date are no longer applicable. And lastly, the dispensary piece, and I asked Attorney Polster to submit something in writing because, again, this is sort of one of the pieces that's really evolving and has changed substantially. The state, removed their 8 dispensary cap, they reduced the fees, and it's really, as I understand it, more about a commercialization of caregivers. And so I think that, and I know that Ms. Pelletier is online, I'm not sure if she would like to make a public comment at the conclusion of our discussion, but I really think that there are some caregivers where this is not just a one-person operation. It's sort of a collaboration of caregivers under an LLC, and we see that now as it is. And so I certainly have heard pretty consistently from both the community. I think I made public comments to this effect. There are really 2 concerns from the community that we hear consistently through our licensing process, and not so much anymore now that we've gone to administrative renewals, but concerns around retail and traffic and operating under the influence and components of that, and certainly the odor. And so I have not heard any interest from anyone on council to date about expanding the ordinance to include a retail operation. That is another piece that is evolving. I think I saw that there's a bill at the State House about allowing for some local financial benefit for retail operations. Again, not saying that changes the opinion, but certainly is an evolving piece. And so I think that the dispensary piece, I think I would like to better understand and bring back some additional information to this committee about what that might look like to incorporate and what that means. And I think that still allows for the prohibition on retail, but allows for the recognition that these operations are not just simple one-person caregiver operations anymore.
Yeah, just sort of a little footnote to that. The other concern that I have related to that is that we create these exceptions that come from the direction of caregivers or dispensaries and that sort of thing. It's really the equivalent of a retail operation. It's very similar except in name. So I think we need to be cautious about that as well. So it doesn't seem like this is another door for us to move it forward before the public may be ready for it.
One final, yeah. In my conversation, I did have a conversation with Joe Polster, and I think that something the council would need to strongly consider is looking at the fees. If we have a medical cultivation establishment that's really better identified as a dispensary, I think that the fees for that could possibly be looked at as the same as the adult use cultivation.
Okay.
You're talking about a tier system, you're talking about a certain capacity, and that may actually generate, to the degree that's relevant to the conversation, or warrant a higher fee in that regard. And so if you, with your consent or approval or recommendation, I would like to evaluate some of those components as well and bring it back to the committee.
Great. So I don't know that we needed formal
No, I think
motion. We've, I think, provided through our discussion some guidance and
we just need more.
just
We need more details.
more content from Liam and to help guide our activity. So any other
Do you
any
have
comments?
public?
Any public comment? Allison, go ahead.
Want me to do it from
Well, you
here?
can do it from the podium.
Hello, it's nice to see everybody in person.
I'm just going to add my 2 cents on the marijuana thing. I was very surprised to see, in addition to the last ordinance meeting, I was really surprised to see the RF question come up again in long-range planning. And that according to Jay's memo, it was at the bequest of council leadership that it was being revisited. Now, I don't know if that had to do with former Councilor Johnson, but it said at the bequest of council leadership. So,
It was.
and I know I'm jumping ahead of the process, but I just wanted to get in front of it and just to say that, we just did this 2 years ago. I think marijuana fatigue is a great way to put it. And that, it was great at the time that the council responded to concerned residents about, specifically Spur Wink Road, Black Point Road area that is zoned as rural farmland, but it really is a rural residential area. And the concerns I can only speak for myself, but the concerns haven't changed. Odor is a concern, security, and certainly chain link fence and bright security lighting would be totally out of character for the area. And also the proximity to residential proximity, that concern hasn't changed at all either. One thing that struck me at long range planning, and Councilor Katarina, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but I think you made a comment about contract zones. And from the Jay's memo, also, I guess this also bubbled up because there is one property owner, I want to say over on Beach Ridge Road, that has a potential proposal for a contract zone. So that's what kind of prompted the conversation of revisiting the RF versus looking at a contract zone. And I think you mentioned that you don't care for contract zones because, my word, not yours, that they kind of void or nullify zoning. But I would say the same thing with having, zoning or allowed uses in zoning every which way the wind blows, if you pardon the pun, in that, we now have solar, utility scale solar that could go in the area, or marijuana, and it just changes. And so what I would say to that is, what is with the given zoning, what is the predictability for the people who live in the zone? And so if moving forward, you're going to consider revisiting this, I would hope that you would consider going back to the property owner that, requested a contract zone review. They certainly have the right to do that. Or if you're looking at the RF zone, to approach it as an overlay versus just allowing it in every RF zone all over town. Or the other thing is to rezone what I call the Spur Wing Road corridor. I understand from the planning board meeting when we did this 2 years ago that it was originally zoned as rural residential, and that's really what it is. So, I think that if it moves forward, I'm guessing that there would be more people than myself that would object to it. So I thank you for letting me speak up far in advance.
Thank you. Anybody out there in the Zoom land, YouTube land, who would like to speak? Public comment?
There's some.
Mhm. Ms. Pelletier, do you wish to make any public comments at this time? You can just raise your hand if you would.
Okay. Hearing none or seeing none, I would at this time be very happy to entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.